What if every unanswered prayer you've ever whispered wasn't ignored? What if it was misdelivered? Not because God didn't hear you, but because you were sending the letter to the wrong address. The truth Neville Goddard uncovered is simple. God was never out there, he was always here within you. And the only language he understands is not words, but feeling. So many people spend years chasing after signs, begging for miracles and waiting for answers, as if God were a distant figure holding back blessings. They pray, they plead, they repeat the same words night after night, and yet life feels stuck. Deep down, they start to wonder, am I not worthy? Am I being ignored? That silent doubt eats away at faith. But here's the paradox Neville Goddard revealed. The problem was never that God wasn't listening. The problem was where you were looking. The divine presence was never outside. It was within you all along. And the channel to that presence isn't complicated rituals or endless repetition. It's something far more simple, something most people overlook, feeling. Because the moment you shift your inner state, everything begins to change. Feeling is the true prayer, the only language your subconscious and the divine understand. And when you dare to feel the end as already real, life bends itself to match that state. That's why Neville declared, feeling is the secret. He had grown up hearing that God was somewhere far away, almost like a distant king who needed to be pleased with rituals and sacrifices. Many people live like this, searching the skies, scanning for miracles, waiting for something to descend from above. They visit places, light candles, and make promises, hoping that the answer lies out there. And yet, even after all the effort, their hearts still feel empty. That emptiness whispers that maybe they're looking in the wrong direction. Think about how common it is to chase signs. Someone loses a job, and immediately they pray for a door to open, but only outside themselves. Someone feels lonely, and they plead for a relationship to arrive as if delivered by a courier. We're trained to think God works like the post office, request made, package delivered. But the package rarely comes the way we imagine. And that gap between expectation and reality breeds frustration. It's almost like people are carrying a radio but tuned to the wrong frequency. They keep turning the dial, hoping for a divine broadcast, but all they hear is static. They assume the transmitter must be broken or too far away. But what if the signal was never outside? What if the static is only the noise of looking in the wrong place? That's the puzzle Neville Goddard kept pointing to. Families, traditions, and even well-meaning friends reinforce the same idea. Ask hard enough and heaven will listen. How many times have you heard, pray and wait, God will send you the answer? While the advice sounds comforting, it keeps the person dependent on waiting. And the more one waits, the more one believes the power is somewhere else. It's like living life at the bus stop, hoping the right bus finally passes. Have you noticed how this external search creates cycles of disappointment? A person prays desperately, sees no result, then feels abandoned. They think, maybe I didn't ask the right way, or maybe I'm not worthy. That's when guilt and fear sneak in. But guilt doesn't open doors. It closes them tighter. And fear doesn't invite miracles. It keeps the heart restless. The loop goes on until something shifts inside. This external chase isn't always about religion. Even non-religious people play the same game, just with different labels. They call it luck, destiny, or the universe. They say, when the stars align, things will happen. Deep down, it's the same pattern, waiting for an outside force to change an inside condition. And while they wait, the inner state, fear, lack, doubt, keeps producing the same results. Neville often illustrated this with simple examples. Someone prays for money, but continues to feel broke inside. Someone begs for love, but continues to feel unworthy. They're like farmers planting seeds in dry sand and expecting a harvest. It doesn't matter how long they wait, sand cannot grow fruit. In the same way, begging from emptiness doesn't produce abundance. You've probably felt this yourself, kneeling, whispering words, and sensing they don't go beyond the ceiling. That hollow sensation after prayer is familiar to many. It makes people wonder, is God even listening? But the real question might be, am I listening to myself? Because if the divine lives within, then silence after prayer isn't abandonment, it's misdirection. The truth is, no matter how passionately one searches outside, the answers rarely arrive there. External signs, when they appear, are only reflections of what's already stirring inside. It's like staring at a mirror and waiting for the reflection to smile first. You can wait for eternity, but until you smile, the glass won't change. The outside only mirrors what the inside commands. And here lies the turning point. realizing that the divine presence has never been over there. The long search through churches, gurus, stars, or miracles is only preparation for the moment when someone finally asks, "What if the temple I've been searching for is me?" That question cracks the door open to Neville's revelation, that God is not distant at all. In fact, he's closer than breath, and that discovery changes everything. When Neville Goddard said that God was not distant, but living inside each one of us, he wasn't speaking in poetic metaphors to comfort restless hearts. He was pointing to a practical reality, almost shocking, that dismantles old beliefs. This idea of God within Neville Goddard is not reserved for sermons. It's expressed through consciousness itself, through that silent "I am" that precedes every word. The divine is not a visitor, it's the permanent resident. Think about how often people say, "I prayed, but I didn't hear an answer." Neville flipped this logic upside down. The answer doesn't need to come from the outside, because the voice of God is already the conscious thought itself. It's that spark that whispers, "I exist." Once someone realizes this, they no longer beg for signs. Their very awareness is the sign. This "I am" is not just philosophy, it's the root of creation. When someone affirms "I am healthy" or "I am abundant" and manages to feel it as true, they activate the divine spark within. It's not magic words, it's the recognition of inner divinity consciousness that lives inside. That's why Neville insisted that prayer Neville Goddard spoke of was never begging, it was assuming the state of being. And notice how revolutionary this is. While people run after holy places, relics, or sacred objects, Neville pointed inward. The sacred is not in the object, it's in the awareness that perceives it. The water itself is not holy, it's the consciousness that blesses it. This shift in perspective is liberating because it removes power from the unreachable and places it back into the heart of the individual. Imagine a man traveling across the world, searching for miracles in distant mountains. He spends, suffers, and still returns empty. But the day he closes his eyes and realizes that life responds to what he feels, something cracks inside. The search ends. He understands that the sacred ground was never geography. It was his own consciousness. From that moment on, the outer world begins to rearrange itself around the new understanding. The revelation that God dwells within also dismantles fear. If the divine were a distant judge, people would live in constant insecurity, never knowing if they had pleased him enough. But once they understand that imagination creates reality, fear dissolves. There is no tribunal outside. There is only the law of assumption feeling, reflecting whatever state one dares to occupy. That is the perfect justice of consciousness. Neville often repeated, "The true temple is the body and the altar is the mind." When someone lies down in silence and dares to live in the end, they are in full communion with God. There is no separation between creator and creation, only one life expressing itself through many forms. This union is so simple that most miss it, searching for complexity when the truth is disarmingly direct. And if God is within, there is no distance between asking and receiving. What we call prayer requires no intermediaries, because the channel is already open. The language of that channel is not words, it is feeling. Those who grasp this stop spending energy begging and start investing energy in feeling. That is when prayer ceases to be a monologue and becomes creation itself. This revelation changes how challenges are seen. If everything begins in consciousness, then the problem is never the outer crisis, but the inner state that sustains it. The world does not need to shift first for someone to feel different. On the contrary, when one feels different, the world cannot help but shift. That is why Neville insisted that feeling is the secret, because the unseen shapes the seen. To discover that God dwells in the I am is like opening a door that was never closed. The only mistake was looking the wrong way. The moment one finally turns inward, they realize they were never alone. And even more, they realize that feeling is the real prayer, which naturally leads us to the next truth. If God lives within, what language does he truly understand? Words alone can be empty. People repeat long prayers, memorize sacred phrases, and chant with their lips, but deep down nothing moves. Neville Goddard explained that God does not respond to vocabulary, he responds to vibration, and that vibration is nothing more than feeling. The language of the divine is not spoken, it is felt. Think of it like music. You don't need to understand the lyrics to feel the song. A melody can make you cry without saying a word. In the same way, the universe responds to the emotional tone beneath what you say. You can recite "I am blessed" 1,000 times, but if you still feel lack, that's the frequency you're transmitting, and reality mirrors that. This is why feeling is the secret. When someone enters a state of gratitude before anything changes outside, they are already speaking fluently in the language of God. Gratitude, peace, joy, certainty. These are the words of the soul. They bypass logic and go straight to the subconscious. That's where creation begins, where imagination creates reality. Have you ever noticed how a person in love glows even before anything official happens? Their smile, their energy, their presence, all communicate a reality they already feel. That's the prayer Neville Goddard pointed to. They are not asking for love, they are radiating it, and the world can't help but reflect it. The state precedes the fact. It's the same with abundance. Someone may not have much in the bank, but if they live in the end feeling secure, provided for, rich in spirit, the external begins to align with that inner tone. Others sense it too. Opportunities appear, doors open, and circumstances rearrange themselves. Why? Because the inner language has been spoken clearly. Abundance is already here. Children actually understand this better than adults. A child doesn't hope their imaginary world is real. They feel it as real. The cardboard box is a spaceship. The stuffed animal is alive. And in their world, nothing breaks that reality. Neville's genius was reminding us that childlike imagination is the purest form of prayer, because it doesn't ask, it feels. Think about your own experiences. Have you ever walked into a room where someone was angry and you felt it without a word being spoken? Or sat with someone joyful and their laughter lifted you instantly? That's the power of feeling. It communicates louder than language. If people can sense it, how much more does the divine, which is consciousness itself? The reason feelings are so powerful is that they impress the subconscious. The subconscious doesn't argue with logic. It accepts impressions. That's why rehearsing lack in prayer doesn't work. It just engraves lack deeper. But when you feel something is already true, you bypass resistance and seed it in the soil of creation. And soon, the fruit appears in the outer world. So when Neville said law of assumption feeling, he was pointing to this hidden language. To assume is not just to declare, it is to feel, to wear the state as if it were already yours. That assumption speaks directly to God within Neville Goddard described. And that voice cannot be ignored, because it's not outside. It's the very heart of who you are. If words are the lips, then feeling is the heartbeat. Lips can lie, the heart cannot. And so the question is no longer, what do I say, but what do I feel? Because in the silent dialogue between the self and the divine, feeling is the only language that never gets lost in translation. Which leads us naturally to another question. Why then do so many prayers fail? Most people were taught that the longer and louder the prayer, the more effective it will be. They plead, they repeat words endlessly, they even bargain with God. But deep down, they leave the prayer the same way they entered, worried, anxious, and doubtful. That's why nothing changes. Empty words never move the unseen, because they lack the one ingredient that matters, feeling. Neville Goddard explained it clearly. Prayer is not a matter of convincing an outside God to listen. It's about impressing the subconscious with an inner conviction. When someone begs with a heavy heart, what they're really affirming is, I don't have it. And the subconscious, which only knows how to mirror, reflects exactly that state of lack back into reality. That's why begging feels so exhausting. It rehearses absence. Have you ever seen someone pray for health while constantly checking if their symptoms got worse? Or someone praying for money while still repeating, I'm broke? Their lips speak one thing, but their heart carries another. The subconscious listens to the feeling, not the syllables, and so the prayer fails, not because God ignores them, but because the law of assumption faithfully delivers the state they truly embody. Empty prayers are like sending an unsigned letter. You may put words on paper, but without a name or feeling, it never reaches its destination. The mailbox of the subconscious cannot read empty ink. It reads vibration. Without the imprint of belief, the words vanish in silence. And the person mistakenly assumes heaven is closed, when in truth it never received a message. This is why repetition without faith often becomes dangerous. Instead of building conviction, it engraves doubt. Each time the prayer is repeated without feeling, it convinces the mind a little more that nothing is happening, and soon the prayer itself becomes proof of failure. I've prayed for years, and still nothing. They don't see that the act of begging has been the very chain holding them back. Neville warned against praying from desperation. Desperation is not neutral. It's magnetic. It attracts more reasons to feel desperate. Imagine planting seeds in the desert. You can water them daily, but the soil cannot sustain growth. That's what happens when someone prays without shifting their inner state. The soil of the subconscious remains dry, unable to bear fruit. But when prayer carries genuine feeling, even the simplest whisper transforms reality. A single moment of deep conviction outweighs 1,000 empty words. Think of the woman who simply touched the hem of Christ's garment. She didn't beg, she believed. That feeling of certainty spoke louder than any plea. And that's why her reality shifted instantly. It's not that prayer itself doesn't work. It's that the kind of prayer most people practice is misdirected. They believe they're talking to a God outside when the true dialogue is inward. They believe their effort is measured by volume or repetition when it's measured only by state. This is the radical shift Neville Goddard wanted people to see. Words without feeling are just noise. So the failure of prayer is not proof that God is absent. It's proof that feeling is the channel, and without it the line stays silent. The law of assumption does not listen to words. It listens to the mood they carry. And once someone grasps that, their prayers change forever. They stop begging and start imagining. They stop repeating and start assuming. And here's the beauty. Once someone learns why empty prayers fail, they can finally stop wasting energy in frustration. Instead, they begin to pour that energy into what truly matters, cultivating the invisible channel. Because if prayer is not about asking, but about feeling, then the next step is to understand that feeling itself is the bridge between man and the divine. Neville Goddard revealed that feeling is not just emotion. It is the invisible channel connecting the conscious mind, the subconscious, and the divine. Think of it as a current running beneath the surface of thought. Words may decorate the surface, but feeling is the electricity that powers the message. Without that current, nothing reaches the subconscious. With it, reality begins to shift. It's almost like tuning a radio. The conscious mind is the hand turning the dial, the subconscious is the receiver, and God within Neville Goddard described is the transmitter. But the actual signal? That's feeling. If the station is off by even a small degree, all you hear is static. But once you lock into the right frequency, the state of already being, it plays clearly and effortlessly. This is why the law of assumption insists on more than just affirmations. Saying, "I am abundant," without feeling abundance is like dialing a station and leaving the volume muted. Nothing is transmitted. But when the declaration carries emotional conviction, peace, joy, gratitude, the subconscious receives the signal fully, and the unseen begins to mold itself into form. Feeling is also the bridge that bypasses logic. The conscious mind may argue, "This is impossible, the evidence says otherwise." But the subconscious doesn't deal in logic, it deals in impressions. That's why imagination creates reality. It imprints through feeling, not through rational debate. The moment the feeling of the wish fulfilled is accepted, creation begins, even if reason disagrees. Consider how athletes visualize. They don't just see themselves winning. They feel the sweat, the victory, the crowd's roar. That feeling programs the body to move in alignment with the vision. In the same way, when you live in the end, the body, the mind, and even circumstances begin to align with the state felt as real. Feeling is the bridge that makes imagination tangible. Think of a bridge over a river. On one side is the conscious thought, on the other is manifestation. Words are like travelers waiting at the edge, but without the bridge of feeling they cannot cross. Once feeling appears, the bridge lowers, and the message passes easily to the subconscious. That's why Neville called feeling the secret. It completes the connection. The power of this channel is subtle but constant. Every day people are praying without realizing it, not by words but by moods. Anxiety is a prayer. Gratitude is a prayer. Confidence is a prayer. Whatever dominates your feeling state is the signal broadcast to creation. The world outside only echoes what's being transmitted within. This also explains why fleeting emotions don't always manifest instantly. The channel isn't about momentary sparks, it's about the dominant current. One flash of joy won't erase years of fear, but as the emotional tone shifts consistently, the bridge stabilizes, and the subconscious accepts the new state as permanent. Then the outer reality adjusts accordingly. Neville often said, "Feeling is the one and only medium that connects you with your fulfilled desire." It's invisible, But it's not weak. Like radio waves or Wi-Fi signals, it works whether you believe in it or not. The only question is, what frequency are you transmitting? Because the divine within answers to tone, not words. And once you understand this invisible channel, prayer takes on a new meaning. It's no longer about speaking endlessly. It's about aligning the emotional current. The question shifts from what should I say to what do I feel? And that realization leads straight to Neville's most famous teaching. 3 simple words that unlock the entire mystery. Feeling is the secret. Neville Goddard condensed his entire teaching into one phrase: feeling is the secret. Not imagination alone, not words, not effort, but the emotional conviction behind the assumption. When you feel something is real, you've already planted it in the soil of the subconscious. And once planted, it must grow. The law of assumption makes it inevitable. It's easy to mistake this for positive thinking, but Neville was clear. Thoughts without feeling are weak, like seeds scattered on stone. They don't take root. The subconscious doesn't respond to hollow statements. It responds to lived experience within. That's why imagining the end result and feeling it now is the essence of prayer Neville Goddard spoke about. Think about when you wake up from a vivid dream. Even though it wasn't real, your body reacts as if it were. Heart racing, palms sweating, emotions alive. That's how the subconscious treats every felt assumption. It doesn't ask whether it came from the outer world or imagination. It accepts the feeling as fact, and then reality bends to match it. Neville compared this to conception. A seed doesn't need constant effort. It needs to be planted once with certainty. Feeling is the conception of your desire. You don't keep digging it up to see if it's growing. You rest, knowing life is doing its work. In the same way, when you assume the wish fulfilled and live in the end, the unseen process begins automatically. This is why many struggle with manifestation. They think it's about wishing harder or visualizing longer, but the secret is not duration, it's intensity. A single moment of genuine conviction can outweigh months of mechanical repetition. One deep assumption felt in the heart impresses the subconscious more than 1,000 anxious affirmations. Imagine 2 people praying for abundance. One repeats words nervously, hoping something changes. The other closes their eyes, imagines holding money, feels gratitude wash over them, and then rests in that state. Which prayer do you think is heard? The law of assumption feeling is precise. It delivers not what is said, but what is felt. Feeling is also the reason why trying to fake it till you make it often fails. Pretending without belief only reinforces the lack. But when you dare to feel the state as true, even if circumstances disagree, you are no longer pretending, you are creating. That's why Neville insisted, it's not about waiting for proof, it's about becoming proof. The secret also explains why detachment is so powerful. Once you've felt it as real, you don't need to chase or beg. You live with quiet certainty, like someone who knows a letter has already been mailed. You don't check the mailbox every 5 minutes. You trust the process. That trust itself is feeling, and it seals the prayer. Over and over, Neville emphasized that imagination creates reality, but only through feeling. Visualization without emotion is like painting without color. It lacks life. But add feeling, and the picture breathes. The subconscious accepts it, and the world outside begins to shift. That's why God within Neville Goddard taught is not swayed by words. It listens only to states. And here's the beauty of this secret. It belongs to everyone. You don't need special rituals, long ceremonies, or permission. You need only the courage to feel differently. Because once you embrace feeling as the channel, prayer transforms from asking to assuming. And that understanding naturally leads us to practice. How do we actually pray with feeling? Neville Goddard taught that real prayer is not about asking, it's about assuming. The technique is deceptively simple. You close your eyes, you quiet the mind, and you step into the scene of the wish fulfilled. Not tomorrow, not someday, now. You let the feeling of the end wrap around you like a warm blanket. That is the prayer of feeling. Instead of repeating, please give me this, you imagine, thank you, it's already mine. Gratitude is the doorway because it assumes completion. You wouldn't thank someone for a gift unless you already had it. In the same way, thanking in prayer signals to the subconscious that the desire is accomplished. The divine within responds to that certainty. Neville recommended doing this in a drowsy state, right before sleep or upon waking. Why? Because that's when the conscious mind relaxes, and the subconscious is most receptive. In that twilight zone between waking and sleeping, images and feelings slip past resistance. It's the perfect moment to impress the law of assumption feeling into the depths of being. For example, if someone desires healing, they don't beg to be cured. They imagine themselves already healthy, walking, smiling, strong. They feel the joy of wellness, the ease of freedom in their body. That feeling plants the seed, and the body, guided by consciousness, begins to align with the state assumed. Prayer becomes the blueprint for healing. If the desire is financial, the technique is the same. Instead of worrying over bills, imagine the relief of them paid. Feel the weight lift, sense the peace of abundance. Picture yourself checking your account and smiling. Let the emotion of security wash over you. That's more powerful than hours of anxious affirmations, because the subconscious accepts feelings, not numbers. Relationships follow the same law. If someone prays for love, the prayer is not, "Send me someone." It is, "I already am loved." Close your eyes and imagine the warmth of companionship, the sound of laughter, the peace of belonging. Feel it so vividly that your heart believes it now. That state magnetizes circumstances to mirror it. Neville explained that persistence matters. Not persistence in asking, but persistence in feeling. Each night as you drift to sleep, you return to the scene. You don't watch for results anxiously, you rest in certainty. Just as a farmer doesn't dig up the seed to check if it's growing, you don't disturb the prayer. You trust that the unseen is already at work. And when doubts arise, as they inevitably do, the answer is simple: return to the feeling. Don't fight the doubt with logic, replace it with assumption. Close your eyes, breathe, and step back into the end. Doubt loses power when certainty is rehearsed. This is the true discipline of prayer Neville Goddard taught, training the inner state, not the outer circumstance. Over time, this practice reshapes identity. You stop being the person who asks and become the person who already has. That subtle shift is everything. The outer world has no choice but to catch up. Because when you live in the end lives in you. And feeling is the bridge that carries the unseen into the seen. The prayer of feeling is not mystical, it's practical. Anyone can do it. The only requirement is willingness to believe inwardly before seeing outwardly. And once someone dares to pray this way, they discover the quiet signs of alignment: peace, confidence, detachment. Which brings us directly to the next question. How do we recognize when we're truly aligned with God within? When someone begins to align with the God within Neville Goddard spoke of, the first sign is serenity. It's not that life suddenly becomes problem-free. It's that the inner storms calm. The person no longer feels tossed by every wave of circumstance. Instead, they carry a quiet center, a stillness that whispers, "It's already done." That inner peace is proof of connection. Confidence is another indicator, not the loud, boastful kind, but a natural certainty. It's the difference between hoping something works and knowing it will. People sense this confidence without words. They see it in posture, in tone, in presence. It radiates because the person is no longer begging life to change. They are resting in the law of assumption feeling. Detachment is also a powerful sign. This doesn't mean indifference. It means freedom from urgency. Someone aligned doesn't cling to outcomes with desperation. They trust the process, like a farmer trusts the seed in the soil. They stop checking the when and how because they know the unseen is already working. That effortless trust reveals alignment. Joy appears too, but it's not tied to conditions. It's a joy that bubbles up without external cause. The simple act of being alive feels enough. This joy is contagious. Others feel lifted just by being near. That's because the person has tapped into inner divinity consciousness, where fulfillment begins inside, not outside, and the world reflects that tone back. Another sign is gratitude, not forced, but natural. Gratitude becomes the air they breathe. They don't wait for the big thing to be thankful. They notice the little signs, the small confirmations that life is on their side. Each moment feels like evidence of answered prayer. And that gratitude multiplies because what is appreciated expands. Aligned individuals also speak differently. They don't spend time rehearsing complaints or doubts. Their language carries subtle authority because it flows from inner certainty. They may not quote scripture or philosophy, but every word feels rooted. It's as if their speech itself is prayer Neville Goddard described, simple, clear, and soaked in feeling. A key marker of alignment is patience without frustration. When others panic at delays, they rest. They don't confuse waiting with lacking. Instead, they understand that everything arrives in perfect rhythm. This patience is not passive, it's powerful. It shows that the inner world has already accepted the desire as real, no matter how long the outer takes. People aligned with God within also stop seeking signs frantically. Ironically, that's when signs appear everywhere. A random phrase, a chance encounter, a sudden opportunity, all seem to echo their inner state. These are not coincidences, they are reflections. The outer world mirrors the dominant feeling inside, confirming that imagination creates reality. Perhaps the most subtle sign is detachment from validation. The person doesn't need others to agree or applaud. They live quietly in their conviction because they know the truth doesn't require consensus. This independence shows they are rooted in the only source that matters, the divine within. External approval becomes optional, not essential, and all these signs point to one undeniable truth. Alignment is felt before it is seen. You know you're aligned not because everything outside looks perfect, but because everything inside already feels complete. And once the inner mirrors wholeness, the outer has no choice but to follow. Which leads to the next realization: the world is always mirroring what we feel. Neville Goddard often said the world is nothing more than a mirror. Whatever dominates within inevitably shows itself without. If someone feels lack, life reflects lack. If someone feels abundance, opportunities emerge. It's not about luck or fate. It's the law of assumption at work. The outer is always the photograph of the inner negative. Think of a mirror in your home. If you stand frowning, the reflection frowns back. You don't argue with the mirror or beg it to smile first. You know the only way to change it is to change your own face. Life works exactly the same way. The reflection cannot alter until the inner expression shifts. That's why imagination creates reality. It's all projection. This explains cycles people can't seem to break. Someone convinced they are unlucky keeps attracting loss. Not because life enjoys tormenting them, but because their inner state sends out that broadcast. The outer world is only answering faithfully. When they dare to feel differently, the cycle breaks. Until then, the mirror has no choice but to repeat. It's easy to test this in daily life. Walk into a room with irritation and suddenly everything feels heavier. Conversations clash, people react defensively, but enter the same room with calm confidence and notice how others soften. Nothing outside truly changed. It was the inner tone setting the stage. This is the silent proof that feeling is the secret. Neville explained that the subconscious is impartial. It doesn't decide what is good or bad for you. It simply reflects the state impressed upon it. If fear dominates, fear is mirrored. If faith dominates, faith is mirrored. This is why prayer, Neville Goddard emphasized, is not about words. It's about assuming the state you want the world to echo. Consider relationships. If someone constantly feels unworthy, they often find partners who confirm that belief. But when they shift into self-worth, feeling valued within, different people appear. The outer world reshapes itself, not because others suddenly changed, but because the mirror reflects the new self-image. The world has no option but to obey. Even money follows this law. A person who feels scarcity will experience constant shortage, no matter how much they earn. But one who feels secure, who lives in the end of abundance, finds resources multiplying. Jobs, ideas, and opportunities appear as natural reflections. The shift wasn't in the economy, it was in the inner state. This truth also explains why fighting the outer world rarely works. Trying to force circumstances while feeling powerless only reinforces powerlessness. It's like punching the mirror, hoping the reflection changes. The wiser move is always inward. Shift the feeling, and the reflection adjusts itself. Resistance fades once the inner picture is corrected. When someone grasps this, they stop blaming fate, luck, or other people. They take responsibility for their own state, not in a guilt-ridden way, but in an empowered way. Because if the world mirrors the inner, then changing the inner guarantees the outer must follow. That's freedom, the realization that the pen is in your hand. And here's the turning point. Once you see the outer as a mirror, you realize it's not your enemy, it's your teacher. It faithfully shows you what you've been feeling. If you don't like the lesson, change the tone inside. That mirror will reflect back soon enough. Which brings us to Neville's ultimate conclusion: meeting the divine within yourself. Neville Goddard's final revelation is simple yet profound. To truly meet God, you must turn inward, not to distant heavens or holy mountains, but to the quiet core of your own being. There, in the silence behind thought, lives the divine presence. It doesn't announce itself with thunder. It whispers in the stillness of "I am," and when you feel, you've already touched it. This meeting is not a one-time mystical event, it's a daily practice. Every moment you choose to feel the wish fulfilled, you are standing face to face with God within. Each assumption, each inner conviction is a handshake with the Creator. The union is intimate, personal, and constant. You don't visit God, you dwell with Him as consciousness. Imagine sitting quietly and shifting from worry to peace. In that moment, you've stepped into divine alignment. That inner transition is more sacred than any ritual, because it's in feeling that prayer Neville Goddard described takes place. The altar is not stone, but the heart. And every assumption is an offering to the infinite. Meeting the divine within also dissolves the illusion of separation. You no longer chase a distant God, nor doubt whether He hears you. You realize He is you, the deeper self, the awareness behind awareness. This is why feeling is the secret. It is the language of union. When you feel, you and God speak as one. This realization also removes the burden of striving. You don't need to prove yourself worthy to an outside judge. You are already worthy because you already are. The act of feeling differently is not climbing a ladder to God. It's uncovering the truth that He has been with you all along. Imagination creates reality because imagination is divine activity. When you meet God within, prayer changes from asking to assuming. You no longer hope, you know. You no longer wait, you live in the end. That shift births a quiet confidence, an unshakable faith that circumstances cannot disturb. Because once you've met Him inside, no outer appearance can persuade you otherwise. The secret has been unlocked. Every answered prayer becomes confirmation of this union, not because God finally decided to bless you, but because you dared to feel in harmony with Him. The world adjusts to the inner tone like an echo adjusting to a voice. Abundance, health, love, all flow naturally once the inner communion is established. That is the law of assumption in motion. And the beauty is that this meeting requires no effort, no ceremony. It only requires attention, turning away from the noise of the world and toward the whisper of being. In the stillness, you discover that God has always been closer than your breath. That realization turns ordinary moments into sacred encounters. The final truth Neville shared is that the invisible becomes visible through feeling. When you dare to assume and sustain the state, you are walking hand in hand with the divine. Life ceases to be random and becomes deliberate. You are no longer a beggar of fate, but a creator with God. The mirror outside confirms the union inside. And so the journey that began with searching for God outside ends with the discovery that He was never far. He was waiting in the silence of your own being. To meet Him is to feel, to assume, to live as if it were already done, because in truth, it is. And once you see this, you can never see prayer or yourself the same way again. Now that you've seen how prayer isn't about words but about feeling, the real question is, what state are you choosing to live in today? Are you rehearsing lack, fear, and waiting for life to change first? Or are you daring to feel abundance, peace, and fulfillment now? Because the mirror of the world has no choice but to reflect what you embody within. Neville Goddard's truth is timeless. When you assume the end with conviction, you are already united with the divine. Nothing outside can stop what you've accepted inside. So the next time you close your eyes, don't ask, assume, don't beg, feel, and watch as life quietly rearranges itself to match the state you've chosen. If this teaching resonated with you, imagine how much more you can discover by staying on this journey. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications so you never miss the next step in unlocking the power within. Because once you learn to speak the language of feeling, you'll never pray the same way again.